As we talk about fallacious argumentation or weaknesses in an argumentative line of reasoning, there are two schools there of thinking. One deals with fallacies that deal with a case, and the other one deals with fallacies against the evidence there. We're going to talk about fallacies that go against the case, and there are a number of them. The book itself has three chapters, I think, dedicated to that, to these fallacies. And there's a lot of them there. You might want to go through and read those chapters. I'm not going to test on this necessarily, but what I am going to do is ask you to identify certain fallacious reasoning within the cases of your peers in class. So as you get ready to do your first constructive argument coming up in a couple of weeks, part of your assignment will be to point out different fallacies in different cases. So it's pretty important maybe for you to make sure there aren't any fallacies within your own case as you're putting that together. So I'm going to go through perhaps starting from the top, the most popular or ubiquitous types of fallacies, and then work that down. I think I have 15 or 16 of them here. I'm going to try to keep this under 15 minutes so we can get it up to YouTube relatively quickly. First off is the hasty or what's called a sweeping generalization. And these are easy to identify because they usually include terms of extreme, like always or everybody or all or nobody or none. Some sentences are fallacious. So they sound like this: everyone has fond memories of high school. Men are better at sports than women. All advertising is lies. That's not true. And as you see in all these, there are those terms of extreme. So this is a pretty easy one to identify because it deals in absolutes, where in reality we're talking more in terms of degrees. The next one is what's called false extremes, or we get into the either or position or the either or fallacy. And this is where we reduce something that is relatively complex down to just two different ideas. We reduce it down to the black and white, which is a fallacy in and of itself. Here's a statement: the department must either raise its grading standards or bury forever the ideal of academic excellence. Well, there's some wiggle room, there's some gray area in between there. This is misleading because it ignores the existence of other less extreme possibilities or the existence of more different points of view. The straw man policy, or fallacy, is an argument that occurs when you misrepresent an opposing view and make it seem weaker than it is. Witness any rhetoric from Donald Trump, and you'll see what it is that I'm talking about. He defaults to straw man in any charge or accusation that he makes against any opponent, and certainly we're going to be seeing that with Hillary Clinton. So the example here: opposition to nuclear weapons testing in Canada is simple anti-Americanism. Uh, there's no strength to an argument that way. The circular reasoning, or what we call a vicious cycle, is where we go through and say things like exercise is healthy because your body needs exercise, or the play was popular because the audience liked it. It falls back on itself. There is no if this then that. It just goes through and accepts the same proposition that it was based on, and it doesn't lead to anything in terms of reasoning. Post hoc arguments means that we're not making a relationship between cause and effect. I've written this error occurs when a person assumes that because one thing followed another thing, the first item caused the second item. This is the causation correlation concept that we talked about earlier. I broke my leg because it was Friday the 13th. Some students work part-time, fail a course. Therefore, working part-time causes students to fail. We might make a correlation to that, but there's no link for causation. So they're not logical consequences that might happen. What's called a post hoc argument. A two wrongs argument. A bad action is not justified by another wrong action. Your mother taught you this, hopefully on some level. The two wrongs don't make a right. So that chemical company pollutes the river, therefore we were right to blow it up. He was a creep, so I'll be a creep too. This morning with the horrible news about the massacre at the nightclub in Orlando. Because what I've learned about the perpetrator who opened fire there, he was either kissed by a gay man or witnessed that kind of affection and took exception, decided to go through and kill people. Pretty extreme and pretty tragic as well. False analogies, as we talk about analogous reasoning or parallel reasoning, these can make strong emotional appeals and logical appeals, um, but the false ones, the logic will be weak in them. Okay, so what I've written here: university administration argues for new rules because it should be run like a business. Well, no, actually, if it were run like a business, then all of the students become revenue generators for that. So a university is not equal to a business, and should not. It's a weak analogy as a result of that. So look for false analogies. Test out whether the logic goes through and holds true for that. The prediction of consequences fallacy. It's Be careful when predicting that an act will have a positive or negative consequences. Like if you take this class, you'll be a better you'll be a better argumenter, or better at creating argument. I'm hoping that's the case, but I can't guarantee that for anybody, right? And that's vote for me, and I will lower taxes, or I will provide free education, or I will. Um, it becomes a fallacy because nobody knows until that temporal context plays out, how things are going to come together, what kinds of revenue might be available to uh, make that type of policy work. I'm sorry, I'm getting too wordy here. False assumptions. A false assumption can cause all of your arguments that follow that to be invalid. The quotation here: without advertising, no cities could exist. We call this a slippery slope as well, uh, in terms of how we make one assumption about something, how that leads to maybe thermonuclear global annihilation, and we can't make that link in false assumptions. False evidence or misuse of authority. Here we need to be careful of incomplete quotations that are introduced perhaps as evidence. So a movie critic says that most of the movie was unbelievably bad, but there were a few moments of high comedy. But the ad that runs the next day in the newspaper says high comedy, the Toronto Dispatch. So we need to watch for the misuse of statistics, skewed samples, and misleading anecdotal information with that. Non sequitur means it does not follow. So if somebody uses Crest toothpaste, it doesn't mean anything about the quality of the toothpaste. And yet we use celebrity endorsements for this all the time. And every single one really is a non sequitur fallacy. A man does not beat his wife, therefore he is a good husband. Well, it does not follow there in the logic of that. When you beg the question, you're assuming the truth of what needs to be proven. And again, we see this constantly in the campaign rhetoric that's going on. And we see this on both sides, but more on the side of Donald Trump's campaign. When a politician says our feeble government greatly in need of reform must be placed in new hands, or let's make America great again, it begs the question, is America not great now? A student challenges a C grade on the grounds that they're an A student. Boy, that's the same kind of thing. Both of these premises come under question because there's an assumption of the truth that within those that needs to be proven. Sometimes in arguing, people raise irrelevant points that distract from the real issue, and we call these a red herring. And we do this to distract away. And we see this constantly happening within the debates or filibustering in Congress. I've written, a government defends itself on a charge of corruption by saying that the budget is balanced. So this is almost the wrong makes a right kind of thing. Or we get into what's called an ad hominem attack, or we attack the man, woman. We get personal here in attacks, and that goes beyond ignoring the question of the red herring, becomes what's called an ad hominem attack. Watch out for stereotypes. People like you. I got into a little argument with somebody yesterday who said that all you Obama people are all alike. That's a stereotype. We got to be careful of those kinds of things. Watch out for claims. If it's true, then if it hasn't been proven false, and if it's false, it hasn't been proven true. We can boil that down to probably the oldest argument: does God exist? It can't be proven, and true, and it can't be proven false, according to both sides of the aisle who've been arguing that for as long as we've been speaking. The leading question gets the searches for a response that fulfills the fallacy, and so we need to be careful of leading questions. This really gets more into prosecutorial types of fallacy than it does into argumentative. Uh, for example, like the question, have you stopped beating your wife? There's an implication there that you, regardless of how you answer, if you've answered the affirmative, that you um, are indeed culpable of doing that. So this demands a yes or no answer, and both those answers might be wrong. And lawyers often, not sometimes, try to use these kinds of questions. And the last one is the gambler's fallacy. If it hasn't happened for a long time, it's bound to happen again. And that might work out at a roulette table. But we need to be careful not to have that work out within our argumentation. So, 15, 16 different fallacies, 18 looks like. There are more in the book, but these are the main ones for you to get familiar with. All right?